Biodiversity, and a few years ago now signing us up to be an eco-diocese through the eco-church scheme. And it's great that so many of our churches in our diocese have already signed up to that scheme. And I'm pleased that at St. Peter's, we already have our bronze award. To get the award, the way it works is you have to work through 5 different areas. There's worship and teaching, there's buildings, there's community and global engagement, there's lifestyle, and then there's the one that we're looking at today, which is land. It's really important that we understand the true value of our land, not just as a place of beauty or a biodiversity, or as a place where you can find peace and tranquility, but that it's a place where we can engage with our communities in a wider sense and setting. When we talked about a new diocesan environmental policy at Bishop's Council, it was made clear that if we want to be taken seriously by younger generations and schools, then this is an area that cannot be ignored. And I agree with that. And I know the strength of feeling within the community where I live towards environmental matters. But whilst that's true, I think it's really important that we remember that's not why we do this. We don't just do it so that we can be more relevant or taken more seriously by younger generations, nor to simply look good in the communities where our buildings are, or to use this simply as a community outreach programme. Nor do we do this so we can feel better about ourselves, that we're somehow doing our bit. We do this because it is something that we should be doing. It's something that we should always have been doing. It's one of the 5 marks of mission for the Anglican Church, and it's the very first instruction that God gives to humanity in the Bible. We're not here trying to escape some kind of evil world, but we are here, put here by God, to care for the world that God has made, the world that God cares for. So we do it because it becomes part of our worship to God. So it's my pleasure to welcome and introduce to you Harriet Carty, who is a Director of Caring for God's Acre. Harriet is a professional ecologist and has worked in nature conservation for many years, specialising in land management for biodiversity. Drawn by an obsession with islands, she has worked on nature reserves in the Seychelles and the Orkney Islands, then settled in landlocked Shropshire. You'll have to ask her why she decided to do that. Harriet has worked as a consultant for the National Lottery Heritage Fund for many years, supporting work involving landscape scale habitat restoration, volunteering and training. She has been working for Caring for God's Acre for 7 years, initially as a project manager, helping to steer the expansion from a Shropshire and Herefordshire-based charity onto a national stage. And she has been a director now of the charity since January 2017. So before I hand over to Harriet, who's going to speak to us, let's just begin with a prayer. Creator God, you made the goodness of the land, the riches of the sea, and the rhythm of the seasons. As we thank you for your gracious providing, may we cherish and respect this planet and its peoples. And as we begin this session now, be with us in our thinking and transform our hearts ready to worship you through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Harriet.
Whilst we wait for Harriet's slides to come up, I would say that we are recording the event. So if you don't want to be shown at all, you turn off your video pictures. Thank you.
And could you please put any questions in the chat whilst Harriet is talking?
My name is Harriet Carty and I work for Caring for God's Acre. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of your event today. Caring for God's Acre is a conservation charity which is dedicated to burial grounds of all types and denominations, from small rural churchyards or chapel yards to large urban cemeteries. There are an estimated 20,000 burial grounds across England and Wales, so a really large number. And it's thought that they cover a size which is approximate to that of the Isle of Wight or Exmoor National Park. So this is a significant landholding. They're mainly managed by volunteers, be they members of a church congregation, a helpful neighbour or a cemetery friends group. So I'm sure many of you listening today will be those volunteers, and you're part of really a much bigger picture. We think there are perhaps 150,000 similar volunteers looking after burial grounds across England and Wales. Burial grounds will become increasingly important as climate change affects us because they are scattered across the whole country. This slide shows the spread in the Hereford diocese area. Imagine each of those blue and red crosses as a hotspot of wildlife and a stepping stone or refuge for species on the move. So just how good are churchyards for biodiversity? Well, actually, they are fantastic. Did you know that our oldest trees are mainly found in Welsh and English churchyards? The ancient and veteran yews that are found in churchyards are all believed to be over 500 years old and are viewed as being of international importance by experts. So international. Have a look on the Ancient Yew Group website. There's a bit of the map shown here, and perhaps visit a few of these wonderful trees that are found near you. In the UK, we have lost about 97% of the flowery meadows that our ancestors would have known so well. Churchyards, however, often contain this threatened habitat. And if you remember that burial grounds form a landholding about the size of the Isle of Wight, you'll see why an ecologist such as myself is so very excited about this. The reason why churchyard grassland is so special comes down to the management. This plot of land may well have been managed in the same way, year in, year out, for over 1,000 years. In the past, churchyards were usually scythed in the summer, giving a hay crop, and then lightly grazed to keep the grass down. Our tools may have changed, but this is basically what we do now. Whether you have long grass or short, provided the grass cuttings are being collected, not mulched or left to rot, this special habitat is being preserved by you, the site managers. Another special feature of churchyards are the lichens to be found on the stonework. Erecting permanent grave markers became fashionable in the 18th century and remains popular now. As soon as a stone is put in place, be it a monument or a block in a wall, lichens start to colonise and grow there. Carved monuments could have been designed as lichen sanctuaries. In an average churchyard, you'll find many different stone types at different locations in terms of light, shade and moisture, all perfect for a wide range of the approximately 2,000 lichen species found in the UK. The lettering itself offers microhabitats too, sometimes having different species within individual letters. Lichens depend on the stone, but also, in the main, protect it. See how the letter E is eroded while the other letters remain legible. Whilst the veteran trees, the flowery grassland and the lichens are perhaps the three key churchyard features in terms of biodiversity, churchyards and cemeteries often offer sanctuary to many other animals, birds, amphibians, reptiles and insects that are becoming increasingly rare in our wider landscape, both urban and rural. So the first thing I'd like to encourage you all to do is to celebrate and thank those who are looking after these special places for all of us. I like to imagine a chain of volunteers down the centuries caring for the burial grounds of their local communities. It is this longevity of management that makes them so special. The second is to think of your churchyard as an ark, full of species who, with some encouragement, are ready to thrive, spread out across your churchyard and back out into the wider landscape. So what can you do to make your churchyard more welcoming for wildlife? Here are 5 suggestions, and hopefully every church community is able to do at least one of these 5, if not more. I'll now go through all of the 5 and hopefully give you some ideas. Number 1, create a meadow. Choose an area of grass which is in full sun and which is currently short mown. Leave it uncut for about 14 weeks over the spring and summer, no longer than that. See how many wildflowers come up naturally. You may well be surprised. And then trim or scythe the long grass, rake it up and remove it either to a compost heap or use it to make hay, which you may be able to sell. Please have a look at the resources section of our Caring for God's Acre website, as you'll find a great many things there that we've written or recorded to try and help you with this. You'll find an action pack full of useful information, including 2 sheets on managing grass. You'll also find a couple of short films, both on the website and also on YouTube. And also, if you want advice or help, please get in touch. Send me an email or phone me up. I'll be delighted to hear from you. I've already mentioned the fantastic veteran trees found in churchyards, both the yews and also other species like this lovely oak in Stafford. Gently clear below veteran trees, removing young saplings, piles of grass cuttings, sheds, grave spoil, old bottles and anything else that is there. It's important to remove ivy from yew trees, but actually there's no need to do so from other veteran trees, unless of course advised to by an arboricultural expert. You can also spread a thin layer of well-rotted mulch under the canopy, but it must be thinly spread and really well rotted. Again, have a look at the sheets on trees and tree care in our action pack to get some help. Give wildlife a home by creating nesting, roosting, feeding and overwintering places. Consider putting swift boxes behind the louvre in the church tower. Erect a range of other bird boxes with different shaped holes, including open-fronted ones for spotted flycatcher and robin. Put bat boxes on trees, seeking advice first to find the best locations. Hedgehogs, amphibians such as frogs and newts, and reptiles such as slowworm all love deadwood piles and compost heaps, using them to hunt for snails, beetles, worms and other invertebrates. Create a pile of deadwood in a shady place using logs and twigs of different sizes. Compost your grass cuttings. This compost heap will be well used by wildlife. And as well as creating shelter for wildlife, you can do it naturally by having some corners of coarse longer grass or scrub. Insects will overwinter in hollow stems of plants and small mammals nest within tussocks. Plant for pollinators. This is one of my 5 features that I think might be particularly good for people with almost no churchyard or a very small space. Hopefully this is something that everybody can join in with. Make sure your flower beds, planters or pots contain species that are useful to insects. Native plants and grasses, plus both early spring and autumn flowering species are ideal. How about some herbs that people can enjoy too? The wildflower Viper's bugloss is outstanding for insects and very attractive too. Many charities and other organisations have lots of bee-friendly plants, so there's lots of sources of inspiration. I've just included a publication on this slide from Bumblebee Conservation Trust, but there are many others to choose from. Of course, your churchyard is not a nature reserve, and it's important to remember that. So it is crucial that when encouraging nature, you don't discourage people. Here are 5 ways to help bring your local community along with you as you make these changes. 1. Make a plan. Draw up a simple map-based management plan so that people can easily see what is happening and what is going to happen. This gives an opportunity for discussion and consultation too, and it's a good way to ask for volunteers. Inviting people to a cake and rake day, for example, in July when the meadow is cut, is much more appealing than a general call for help. We have a simple 5-step system for drawing up management plans within our action pack, so do have a look at that. Keep the grass mown short in key areas, by the church building and its entrances, with a strip on either side of any paths. Mow around recent and regularly visited graves, as well as war graves and memorials. Create meandering paths for exploring. A simple rule of thumb is to consider how the churchyard would have looked when the person whose grave it is was alive. If graves are 18th or 19th century, or really up until the Second World War, then long grass and wildflowers were the norm. If after the 1950s or 60s, then short mown grass is more suitable. A mosaic of different grass lengths is excellent for wildlife. There's value in short, medium and long. Let people know what you are doing. Change can bring anxiety, and information is reassuring. A sign explaining that long grass will be cut in July removes the fear that it is being neglected, for example. Put up signs on site, use notice boards, newsletters and the local media, and always invite people to help and get involved and pass on their views to you. Run public events to engage local people, telling them about your churchyard and the interesting things to be found in it, and also how you're managing it. How about a Snowdrop Sunday or a Midsummer Cream Tea? Is there a local historian who might lead a guided walk? Recording wildlife is an excellent way to involve people too. This leads me to my 5th point, which is record what you see and tell people about the interesting things to be found. I'm speaking to you again about taking part in Church's Count on Nature, so I'll stop now and tell you more about this one later on.
Thank you. That was really interesting. I know that we have some questions that people have sent in ahead of time, and this might be a good opportunity to quiz you, Harriet, on some of the trickier things that people are finding. Nick Reed is going to manage those questions. Nick, do you want to take us through?
Yeah, thank you. So anyone who has a question, please, for any of the speakers, could you put it into the chat, because it just makes it easier to do this. We had 4 questions sent in advance. We may not have time to address them all because some of them are quite involved. So I'm going to alert 3 people at this stage of the proceedings that I'm going to ask them in order to unmute and ask their question. If you've forgotten what you asked, I can do it for you. But would Jenny Bond please mind unmuting and asking Harriet the question she put into the email? Jenny, are you there?
Sorry, I'm trying to unmute.
Brilliant.
Could you ask my question for me?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So Jenny, as she's at US Harold, a well looked after newer churchyard called an older churchyard next door, which has been neglected. And there are some photos which Stephen is going to put on the shared screen. Native daffodils have been planted with limited success. And there are hummocks of coarse grass. So the first part of the question is, what's the best way to deal with the hummocks of coarse grass? And would it be reasonable to get on and deal with them at this time of the year, or wait until the late summer? And yes. Harriet, I hope you heard that.
I did hear that. Yes, thank you very much. Yes, you have got very, very tussocky hummocks in there, haven't you?
Yes.
I would have said that now would be a really good time
to deal with them, maybe a tiny bit later. Basically, there will have been things that overwinter in there, but they should be waking up and getting active. And so I think now would be a really good time. It is really good for a wildflower meadow generally to give it a spring cut if you can, and a really tough rake in the spring, because that just loosens up that thatched structure of dead grass that we can see in this picture so clearly. It's a lot of work to pull something like this back, and so you might decide to do an area rather than doing it all in one go. But I think if you were to give it a really good cut now and then cut it again later on, you'll find that it's made a lot of difference. These coarse grasses do not like being cut. You just have to keep on top of them, and you will get there. Sorry, I've forgotten the second half of the question now.
Well, I think you answered it. So it was whether to do it now or wait until later in the year.
Okay.
But there is a second part to this question.
Both. Yeah.
There's a second part to this question, which is there is another churchyard which is designated as an SSSI because of native daffodils. And Jenny's asking, would Natural England approve of dividing up some of the congested clumps of native daffodils and relocating them to her churchyard?
I should say that our PCC looks after both churchyards.
Yes.
You should ask, definitely, if it's a triple SI. They might not, to be quite honest, in a triple SI, but they might, as you manage both of them, and you could show them photos and explain why you wanted to. It'd certainly be worth having the conversation and just starting to build a relationship with them. I don't know if you are in regular contact with your officer who's looking after that triple SI, but it's really worth just getting on their sort of radar so that they look your site up on their files and know a tiny bit about it. I mean, you do need to slightly nobble that coarse grass before you're going to get things like daffodils doing well, I think, because they're going to really struggle to get through that.
Thank you. And thanks, Jenny, for asking the question. Can I ask if Liz Dean is there, please, to unmute? Liz has got a very specific question about ivy.
Yeah, hello. I just wanted to know the pros and cons of leaving ivy. You actually mentioned it in your early chat, to leave it in ivy. I leave it in yew, but not in other trees unless it's causing a problem.
But yeah.
Sorry, take it out of you.
Take it out of you.
How do you feel about gravestones? We've got several stones in our church that are completely mantled in ivy.
Yeah, this question comes up a lot. Basically, if you've got a complex memorial like a chest tomb or a cross or one with lead lettering, ivy is really detrimental. It gets into the cracks, it pushes them open, it pulls out the lead. If you've got a simple headstone, it's actually protective. It protects from the weather, it protects from air pollution and just erosion generally. So in terms of the stone, there's a choice there. The next thing to say is that if you've got one of those complex memorials, say you've got a chest tomb covered in ivy, there's a very good chance that now the ivy is holding it together, and that if you were to take the ivy off, you might actually create something really quite dangerous. Historic England's advice is don't remove ivy that's smothering, say, a chest tomb, unless you have the money and you are prepared to mend that monument that you reveal. So be cautious with that one. In terms of wildlife, ivy is very, very good. Fruiting ivy is particularly good. I think many of us have been in a churchyard in the autumn and heard a sort of absolute literally loud buzzing of bees on ivy flowers. It's quite good to stop it covering lichens. It will kill lichens just by smothering them and blocking out the light. So in general, if ivy hasn't got a grip and you've got, say, a beautiful complex monument, or you've got something covered in lichens, it'd be quite a good idea to stop it getting a hold. Similarly, a dry stone wall. But if it's already covered, I think the key question to ask yourself is, why are you uncovering it? So does anybody want to visit that memorial? is there a local history project happening at the moment where people want to read every single one of those inscriptions, photograph them, record them? If not, you are, it will grow back very quickly and you are creating a lot of work, and it is very good habitat. So as with so many things in conservation and elsewhere, ask why. What really is your motivation? And if it's just, well, we think we ought to, that probably isn't good enough, because it's very good habitat. But if it's just getting a hold on a chest tomb, I'd definitely pull it back.
Thank you.
The thing about
Thanks, Harriet.
just to quickly clarify, the thing about trees is that yew trees, particularly ancient yews, I think partly because they grow so slowly, they can be absolutely smothered in ivy, and it can really clasp around the branches and squeeze them. Whereas in general, I mean, it doesn't actually harm trees, apart from sometimes the weight of it can have a sail effect in strong winds.
Thank you. It's probably not for discussion now, but in the chat, some people are saying that their quinquennial says they have to remove ivy from certain things. So there's obviously people going around and sort of stirring things up a bit there. But we only have time, I'm afraid, for one more question. Can I ask Michael Innes, if he's there, please, to ask a specific question on bramble control?
Yes, thank you very much. I've got an old graveyard around the church, then a new graveyard, which half of which is in use. The other half is about a quarter of an acre. It's turned into scrub, and it's well colonized by brambles, long grass, and some snowdrops are trying to fight their way through as well. Over the last couple of years, I've sized it every autumn, winter, to try and cut them back. Unfortunately, the brambles are undeterred and keep coming back throughout the season. And unless I size it several times a year, which is difficult for me to do, seeing as it takes so long, I don't know how else to contain them. I thought of ploughing it up and reseeding it, and then that releases lots more weeds as well, or wilder things, or chemicals, which I don't want to do, because we're trying to keep it as carbon and chemical friendly as possible, really. So the question is, how do I contain a patch of brambles and turn it into a wildflower meadow instead?
Somebody's just written, brambles, dig them up, and I've got to say I'd agree with that. I mean, one question is, why, if it isn't yet being used, again, why are you doing this? Why are you clearing it? Scrub is very good habitat. You might well have hedgehogs in there, all sorts of small birds and mammals. Small mammals will be using it. You might want to clear some of it. Maybe you could scythe a small amount of it several times a year if it's encroaching too near the areas where there are actual burials. But if you're not going to use chemicals, it is a lot of work, and you will need to cut it a lot of times and dig. I wonder about ploughing. I'm not quite sure what ground you're on. I mean, if it's an extension, it might just be an arable field or something like that. But on the whole, ploughing would definitely be quite a destructive, invasive thing to do. But if you've just bought a bit of an arable field, it might not be such a bad idea. But then you're wanting to keep it as short grass, are you? I mean, if it's not yet being used, it might actually not be too bad as it is, perhaps.
Yes, we want to turn into a wildflower meadow, which is nice. It's right next to the new church ground, and so it would make it much more pleasant for people visiting. They have to walk past it to get to the graves. It would be much more pleasant to have a wildflower meadow which has as much wildlife than it would to have a patch of brambles which they might have to fight their way past, or which are encroaching on the graveyard and the path up to it.
Okay, thank you. I've understood it a bit better now. Well, then I think I would try and perhaps for 1 year, see if you could get a group of people and cut it once a month, something like that, and then dig as well, and then really push it back in that way. And then once you have managed to sort of clear it, it's a good idea to mow a path around the perimeter, because presumably the bramble is probably coming out of hedges or banks around the side originally. So to stop it encroaching again, if you have a short mown path, you will stop those runners going across and back into your wildflower meadow. So that's quite a good idea to control it once you've managed to sort of wrestle it back, as it were.
That's really helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We don't really have time for more questions, but I think there is certainly a market for writing up stuff to do with ivy. There seems to be lots of issues coming up with ivy, and so any information that Caring for God's Acre has got on ivy, I think will be well received by everybody. Yep. But Celia, I'm going to ask you, Celia Cundale, I'm going to ask you to ask your question later in proceedings, if that's okay, because that was another of the advanced questions. But otherwise, thank you, Harriet, and I'm going to hand back to Chrissy.
Thank you, Harriet. And I wonder if you've got time in this little section now, if you wanted to have a look in the chat at some of those questions and perhaps answer some of them if we're not going to get time to answer them all whilst the function's going on. That would be great. We're having a little section now where we're hearing from some of our parishes and how they've imaginatively been using their churchyard in a community capacity. So to begin with, we're going to hear from Barbara Norsworthy from Minsterley, and she's going to be talking about how they've adapted their part of their churchyard to be able to be used as a forest school area for the local primary school. Secondly, we're going to hear from Vivian Dehan, who's going to be talking about the churchyard in Bromfield and how they have used it with young people's group who've come along there. And thirdly, we're hearing from Romaine Thompson from Church Stretton, who's going to be speaking about a community arts project that they held in the churchyard. So three very different uses of the churchyard. So if we could start with Barbara, and then we'll hear Vivian next. Thank you, Barbara.
We had a presentation about 4 years ago from someone from Caring for God's Acre and a young man from the Corndon Trust, and they gave a short presentation to our church cafe with some suggestions of what we could do with our churchyard. And we were very lucky that we were offered the opportunity to apply for a grant to help us do this, which we did, and we received £3,000, which was fantastic. And after a lot of discussion, we decided that the best thing for our village would be to have this open classroom in a corner of the churchyard that was very, very overgrown. So the first thing we did was clear the area. So the two young men came to help us. We were quite a small team, and we cleared the area, and they pruned quite a lot of our trees. They cut down unnecessary saplings at the bottom. They cleared all the nettles and made quite a large space. We shredded all the wood, which made a huge pile. We then bought a liner for the area. It was in a corner of the churchyard, right at the back. And then the children from the local school, one class came down and had great fun with their buckets, loading the chippings and carrying them down to make a floor for the area. I think you can see it in the picture. And they also made a path leading into the corner of the churchyard. We also purchased some log seats so that there were enough for each child in one class to sit on, so that they could have their lesson there. We then dug an area for a pond, which we lined. And then on another occasion, when the children came down, we took our buckets and went to the local stream to fill it with water and had great fun. It was actually quite a long way from the area in the churchyard over the wall. It didn't seem very far, but by the time we'd walked across the churchyard and out onto the road and down the road and across the bridge and up the path, it's quite a long way to carry water. And when we got to the stream, the area we had to use so we could get the water out was quite deep, and their wellies weren't long enough. So I ended up going in with my trainers, filling the buckets and passing it back. So we did 2 or 3 trips to fill our pond. And then a couple of people under cover of darkness went down the street with more water from their ponds that actually had some pond life in to get it going. And that was quite exciting when the children came again and they actually found tadpoles in the water. Other things that we did was to make some hedgehog hideaways from bits of old boxes and things. Lots of bug hotels with piles of sticks and grasses. We put a compost heap. We started a compost heap in the churchyard so that all the leaves that we had cleared up could go in there to be used in the future. someone donated a bug hotel for mason bees, which we've got under the, quite close to the church porch, under the drain pipe. We scattered quite a lot of wildflower seeds. There are actually quite a lot of wildflowers in our churchyard throughout the year. The churchyard is not it's managed by the local council now. It's been closed for many years. So we don't have much of a say as to how the grass is cut, but it isn't cut that often. And there are various areas where it's left to go wild. Then the children have been coming down once a fortnight. Each term we had a different class come down, and we provided activities like bug hunts and identifying trees and flowers and looking at the gravestones, looking what was in the pond. And what it did do was a fantastic build-up of relations with local children and their parents. We had the churchyard officially blessed by Bishop Anthony, who came down in his full regalia, and quite a lot of the parents came down to take part in that. And every time the children came, we always finished with a trip into the building for a drink and biscuits. So they were getting that opportunity to go into the church as well, because they're not people that come regularly to the church.
Thank you, Barbara. That is really helpful to hear, and wonderful that you've involved not just the children, but also their parents in that example there. Fantastic work. And Vivian, are you available to speak about Bromfield churchyard?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
I'm having to do this on my phone. So yeah, I just wanted to start by saying, so I'm church warden at Bromfield, St Mary's Bromfield. May I just read a fairly short article written by Mr. Jim Logan, which really just sets the scene of our churchyard. If I could just read that first, although it's not all completely relevant, but it just sets the scene, if that's okay. This was written by Mr. Jim Logan, I think in autumn 2019. It's Bromfield's God's Acre, and if I can just read it out. I am in my local parish churchyard, St Mary's Bromfield. The weather is mild, breezy and threatening rain, but the flowering ivy on the Scots pine is humming with insects, mainly honeybees, assorted flies and wasps. The sweet scent of the ivy flowers waft in the humid air. It was at the base of this tree that I saw a large grass snake just a few weeks ago, basking in the autumn sunshine, its size indicating that it was probably a female. In this churchyard, amphibians on which grass snakes usually feed are not common, so perhaps it survives here on a diet of field voles and bank voles, which are prolific, or slow worms, the legless lizards that do well in the thick, undisturbed sward. I survey the usual haunts of the slow worms, but only see voles today. The reptiles will be inactive now until spring, and torpid in the coldest weather. There are 2 Scots pines near the Lich Gate, and these are a rookery. The birds are absent now, but after Christmas they will be back, renovating nests in a noisy and messy way and dropping twigs all over the path for me to tidy up. The ground beneath these trees is enriched annually by their droppings and detritus, which encourages rank grass, nettles, and cow parsley. And the gravestones in this corner can become quite hidden in herbage until I strim it, or the volunteers from Caring for God's Acre scythe it. I have been carrying out churchyard maintenance here for long enough that the stones themselves are familiar, like weather-beaten old friends, some leaning at eccentric angles, showing their age. And beneath some of the stones do indeed lie old friends. A significant headstone for me is near the gateway on the left. Mary Ann, wife of Thomas Reason. She died aged 24 in 1884. Thomas was buried there too, but 29 years later, He was a previous head gardener on the estate and lived in the house that my family and I occupied for 20 years. He and I have lived lifetimes apart, but I work the same earth as him and walk in his footsteps. I care for 2 war graves. They should be kept shorn to military standards, but I allow one to grow forget-me-nots. The other grave belongs to a Welsh guardsman and has some well-established primroses. The charity Caring for God's Acre has compiled a plant list for Bromfield from their survey, and this list is ongoing. Dominant in the central areas are oxeye daisies, lady's bedstraw, sheep sorrel, self-heal, barnet saxifrage, bird's foot trefoil, and knapweed, with patches of yellow rattle, harebells, cowslips, and primroses. There are native wild daffodils and Alexanders, usually a coastal plant, which grows extensively at the back of the church. I have discovered dormouse nests in the privet on the left of the gate, and in collaboration with Shropshire Dormouse Trust, have built and installed nest boxes on the perimeter of the churchyard. The bats in the church's group have identified the bat colony in the church as Natterer's bat. In a few weeks' time, I'll be here again to decorate the church windows on Christmas Eve with holly and ivy. Within these walls, nothing much will have changed. Unchanging continuity is the essence and appeal to me of this beautiful place. I don't come here to worship, or maybe I do, in this sanctuary for the diverse life that thrives here unobtrusively amid our communal memories and our dead. He says a little more, it's not relevant. So that's Mr. Jim Logan, who is our wonderful volunteer who a lot of the time single-handed maintains our churchyard. And he's very keen on the encouraging the biodiversity and plants and things. But going back to the churchyard and the children's group that in I think it was 2019, our local youth group, the South Shropshire Youth Forum, based in Ludlow, they with some heritage lottery funding, they took part in something called what was it called? Volunteering in Sacred Spaces. And they came and did 2 days in July and August of 2019, and did some wonderful things in our churchyard, including building the most wonderful bug hotel. And I think they also put up some nest boxes, and I think they may have put down some sheets on the ground, some metal sheets on the ground in the corners to, I think that's where the sort of slow worms and things like to go and live underneath the sheeting.
Thank you, Vivian. That's really interesting to hear that you're involving sort of older children as well, isn't it, from the Youth Forum?
Yeah, and we've also got we've also got a small kindergarten in the old school building next door, and they have a forest school, and they get involved as well. Brilliant. Yeah, so a beautiful description as well from your volunteer who does that work in the churchyard. So thank you for sharing that with us. And lastly, we're moving on to Romaine Thompson from Church Stretton, who's going to talk about a community arts project they held in the churchyard. Over to you, Romaine.
Okay, so yeah, we did a community art installation in the churchyard at St Lawrence's in the middle of Church Stretton in the summer last year. The intention was trying to give our community just a moment to stop and reflect on our journey together through the pandemic. What we did is we commissioned some wooden letters, which the first photograph will show you as they were delivered. So on the left, you can see the letters, 9 letters as they were delivered by a local tree surgeon made out of natural wood, ready to fit. What we intended then to do was to use them as a display of artwork created by the local community. So we did 500 bags of various arts activities, all with instructions. Locals then came and collected them from the churchyard, whether they be children or people in their 80s. So it's a very mixed response, mixed community response. We advertised it on our community messaging service. We had people coming down from all sorts of places around Stretton just to pick up bags to do, largely because there was a sense in which people wanted to do something post-pandemic, some engagement with that as a project. We then decided that we would start by displaying the letters in their raw form. So on the right-hand side, you see them as they were before they've been adorned or decorated by the artwork. We used the hay bales so that we could raise them up so people could see them at a decent height as they were passing. And then we displayed the artwork which was returned, and the third photograph shows you that again on the left. There are the 9 letters of the word Strettons. We use Strettons because we wanted to reflect the 3 communities, that's All Stretton, Little Stretton and Church Stretton. And the artwork had been created around 3 themes: sadness, thankfulness and hope. On the right hand side here, you'll see one of the letters representing sadness. These are teardrops on which people had been invited to write something of their own experience of sadness through this difficult time. We had reflections then, which people could read as they walked down the installation. Just to read you the one for sadness: "My soul is in deep anguish. How long, Lord, how long? We bring our sadness, our struggle, our sorrow to God, and we cry, how long, Lord, how long? You keep track of all my sorrows. You have collected all my tears in a bottle." What did we learn? Well, we learned that the churchyard is a fantastic space for mission in its broadest sense. So St Lawrence's, the churchyard, is a thoroughfare. You'll see the path there. People are gathering, moving between the town and the library. Lots of activity. I was there for, I would reckon, maybe parts of 3 days. I had 70 odd conversations. Lots of them with people who don't really engage with church regularly. Lots of them visitors on day trip staycations from various parts of the country, finding Shropshire as a sort of day trip destination, which they'd not really thought about before. The big draw was intrigue. People were curious. What's going on here? What's all this about? So we had just interested conversations. We didn't have a single negative, I didn't have a single negative response. And we had all sorts of joyful things said, which can only be good. It's certainly a platform for us now to have more conversation. It makes us think about the other 2 churchyards in our parish. There are 3 churchyards in our parish. They're very different. We're excited about what potential there is to use them too. If you said to me, were there any downsides, I would say it was seriously hard work, particularly during COVID. We had to adapt and change, and the COVID risk assessment was a hefty document, as you can imagine. We learnt a lot about how to waterproof and windproof art, and we paid lots of visits to collect things which had fallen off and stuck back on, but we would do it all again in a heartbeat. I think we would have, one of the things we wanted to do was make it more interactive. That was really difficult in the COVID thing. So next time around, we want to do something interactive. And of course, we weren't able to use the school, but we will be using the school next time. So a project which engaged us all and was joyful, and we think is a platform for the future.
You're muted, Chrissy.
Thank you, Romain. That was very imaginative and creative, and I'm sure that will have got people thinking of another use of our churchyards. That's brilliant, and to hear the number of people who came and participated is wonderful. Thank you. So we've got an opportunity for any questions for those three speakers from the parishes. If you've thought about anything they've said that you want to raise, and I know there was one question from earlier that might be brought up now as well. Any questions in the chat there for us?
There weren't specifically questions. There are three things, if I may, that I want to say. The first is that Lynn has asked whether there will be leaflets or whether there are leaflets on some of these topics. And the beauty, of course, of having these questions in the chat is that we can find out, and if there aren't leaflets, then we can begin to write them. And Harriet has already given thousands of pounds worth of free consultancy tonight in answering people's questions. The second thing is that Celia has had difficulty with broadband and has lost some of the chat. So can I reassure people that we will be keeping the chat and using it as the basis to develop further ideas. So even if you've lost some of it, we won't. And the third thing, whether it's a question, but Celia Cundale asked a really interesting question, which I don't think we're going to bottom out tonight, but I thought it'd be a really good opportunity. Celia, if you're there, if not, I can put what you posed, but it's to do with plastics in churchyards. And I think it's part of a much broader conversation that some of us have got to have with funeral directors and others rather than for discussion this evening. But Celia, if you're there, would you just like to say what it was you put into the email?
Yeah, I've been doing some research and was shocked to find the amount of plastic that's buried in our churchyards. And I was wondering to what extent Eco Church is committed to our churchyards becoming green burial grounds, in particular, at the moment, having coffins that don't have plastic handles. So hopefully with biodegradable, non-toxic coffins and urns that contain ashes. And can we start to discourage non-biodegradable linings and plastic handles? And if anyone's buried with possessions like jewellery, should they not be made only from natural materials?
Thank you. As I say, I don't think we can answer that tonight, but it's a really interesting question and something that we don't want to lose in terms of going forward. And I think that is part of a wider debate the church needs to be having, really. There weren't specific questions for the speakers because I think the speakers were sort of self-contained, but I just want to reassure people that what's in the chat will be kept and will be commented on and will be fed back to people as well. So happy to move back to you, Chrissy, if that's okay.
Thank you. Thanks, Nick. Harriet, we're handing back to you now for a second part that you alluded to earlier. So we'll hand over to you.
And it's back to the pre-recorded bit, so I'll put that on now.
So I left you earlier, having suggested that you consider running an event to record the wildlife in your churchyard as a good way of involving your local community and showing them what an interesting place it is. There is an ideal opportunity coming up this June. For the first time, Churches Count on Nature is taking place. This is part of Love Your Burial Ground Week, a national week that has been running for several years, with many churches from this diocese getting involved. Churches Count on Nature is a partnership initiative run by Caring for God's Acre, A Rocha, who organise Eco Church, of which this diocese is taking part, the Church in Wales, and also the Church of England. Churches Count on Nature runs from the 5th to the 13th of June, taking in 2 weekends. We are asking people to have a look for wildlife in their local churchyard and tell us what they see. Please go to our website and fill in the booking form so we know how many churches get involved. It's as simple as that. There are 4 W's to making a biological record: who, what, where and when. Who you are. Your name is sufficient, but an email address is helpful. What you saw. Give us as much detail as you know, from magpie or daisy to a full Latin name. Both are equally acceptable and useful to us, so don't worry if you don't know exactly what you're looking at. Where you saw it. Name and address of the churchyard. There was a great many St Mary's, so please give us enough detail to be able to definitely identify where you were. And when. The date, including the year, rather than the time of day. You can send your sightings to us in an email, by post, or if possible, on the iRecord form that's found on our website. This slide shows a screenshot from the Caring for God's Acre website. Please have a look, as you will find more information on how to use this iRecord form. We're hoping that churches will run events and activities during Churches Count on Nature Week. You may choose to run a moth trap or have small mammal traps, as is shown in this slide. You might invite a local naturalist group to visit and see what they can find. Perhaps a local botanist might make a plant list and help people to get to grips with identifying wildflowers. Your activity can be very low-key, a couple of friends noting the birds they hear, or something more structured. It is completely up to you. At the moment, we are hoping that by early June, the country will be at step 3, allowing up to 30 people at an outdoor activity abiding by social distancing rules. You will need to carry out a risk assessment and put sensible measures in place. Perhaps you might decide to limit numbers through booking. Maybe your churchyard would lend itself to creating a one-way system. You can separate people by placing a table between participants and those helping them to identify things, and putting some specimens such as plants or flowers on that table. Perhaps you'd like to keep it even more low-key and simply advertise the week, ask people to drop in throughout it, and give them a way to tell you what they've seen. That might be a blackboard, a notebook, or a box and some post-it notes. There are several frequently asked questions on our websites to help you to plan this week, and also more information will be coming up over the next few weeks, including support on creating that risk assessment and generally planning the activity. We hope that Churches Count on Nature will be fun for children and inspire nature lovers for the future. We have resources and ideas you can use, such as leaf bingo and mini beast hunts. Many children enjoy entering biological records on a tablet or laptop using the iRecord system. They can put their name against something that they have spotted and see it entered into a national system. Bring along some pictures to help, such as a bird book, and see how many children can spot and record a robin, a squirrel, a molehill, something as simple as that. The frequently asked questions will give you more ideas for useful resources, including apps and downloads that you can use for free. So hopefully you're now thinking of ways to get involved. So I thought I'd explain what happens to your records and why they are so important. Caring for God's Acre, working with the National Biodiversity Network and the Church of England, have created a portal showing all churchyards and cemeteries across England and Wales. Your records will feed into this, giving us information for the first time on the national significance of burial grounds for biodiversity. You'll see that a few dioceses, including Hereford, are currently missing from my map. This is very annoying. I've been waiting a long time for this, but they will be uploaded in early May, so please look for your churchyard after that. If you click on one of the green dots on the map, it will open a page about that particular churchyard. Here is an example with 106 species already recorded, 105 fungi and 1 insect. Many of you will be familiar with the Church Heritage Record, the system you use when applying for a faculty. It has a churchyard section, which at the moment contains little information, but we are working with the Church of England to bring this biological data across from the National Biodiversity Network, the atlas that I've just shown you, so that if you do need a faculty, you'll be able to see what wildlife has been spotted and ensure that your plans take this into account. In this way, we're bringing biodiversity and the knowledge that you are going to be providing for us into the very heart of church planning, really helping the church to fulfil its aims of supporting and enhancing nature. That's all from me, apart from to offer you this free starter guide to help you encourage people to have a go at spotting wildlife and recording it. Please email for your free copies. We're very happy to send out up to 10 per church. It's a robust cardboard booklet, so excellent for younger children, and gives you some really nice simple things to have a look for and learn their names. Thank you very much. We look forward to hearing on how you get involved with Churches Count on Nature.
Thank you, Harriet. I don't know if there's any questions that can be raised or have come through the chat, Nick, for that section.
There aren't specifically. There is Mark is asking, and I think the answer is yes. I just want to check. Will the PowerPoints be available for people? They'll be part of the record, presumably, of the conference. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, there aren't specific questions beyond the mass of comments. I mean, this chat is going to be worth going through in detail because I think it's going to lead to quite a lot of leaflets and information going out.
Okay, thank you very much, Nick. So we're moving on now to do some polls, and this is your opportunity to be involved. And Stephen, you're going to lead us through some poll questions that we can answer.
That is right. So for those of you that are familiar with Zoom, this is very straightforward. In a moment, I'll pop up 3 questions for you to answer. And really, having heard from our inspirational speakers this evening, I hope that you will be encouraged to think ahead beyond the lockdown restrictions about what you could be doing to bring greater biodiversity and a rich discovery zone to your churchyards or ones close to you. So this is about just a moment for us to reflect and think about what we could do in the villages, the towns, the communities that we are part of. So I'm going to pop up the questions. This is a time for you to stretch forward and grab your computer and have a go at answering these. just another few moments on that, and then we'll come back together.
Stephen, someone has raised a question that they have to tick a box offering help before they can submit. Is that a loaded question?
That wasn't meant to be a loaded question, but choose the least worst option.
I think it's worth mentioning there that we're not going to be asking people to help. It's about understanding where people may need help so that we can be putting on the right thing. So we're not going to be coming after you to be doing something there.
Great. Well, I think that's probably enough time for us all. There are a few more still coming in. I'll just give you a few seconds to finish off. And I'll close the poll. So lots of positive feedback from the SEEP, which is really encouraging. Thank you for that. We can see that assistance with developing a management plan might be where, and then of course the usual question of looking for your Jim Logan, your fabulous volunteer to come and support you in your churchyard management. That'll be a key thing. So thank you all very much for those ideas and your offers of support. We will no doubt be coming back to those. So at this point, just a couple of things for me to mention. I'll just share my screen once again. So we've done the poll. Eco Church, for those of you not familiar with it, Andy Morgan made a mention of this at the start. It really is a super little initiative to get involved with. I strongly recommend it, particularly just, the first few steps are not that onerous. And it's a lovely way of involving others in the community, perhaps those that are not particularly involved with church life, to come alongside and help you. So it's a really super thing. You can do it online to start off with, gather a few buddies around with you and work towards an award. Our local church managed to get an award last year, which was really exciting. You can see, because of lockdown, I haven't yet displayed this in the church, but it is well worthwhile. So do consider that. Part of this evening is being organised through the Marches, a Christian Environment Network. So if you'd like to know more about that and just be involved in or hear occasional news and inspiring stories, do please get in touch with Chrissy, and we'll add you to the distribution list for that. Just to stress that is a completely ecumenical group, so all friends and neighbours are very welcome to take part. If you want to look at, there are lots and lots of good resources out there to help you think about taking some practical steps. If you want to look at what is on the Church of England website, there's a lot now under their environment section, and they're adding resources to that all the time. You can see just a snapshot of that there on the right hand side. Some very practical tips for you as well as case studies, some short videos of how others have tackled problems as they've gone along. So with that, I'm going to hand back to Chrissy.
Thank you. Harriet, we didn't give you a chance to say anything after that last section. Anything you wanted to add in before we close it shortly and hand over to Mike Burke? Anything you wanted to add in after seeing all those questions? And
well, I hope I managed to answer some of them.
Thank you.
Every now and again, I pressed return and sent off half-answered things, but please bear with me on that sort of technological mess. No, thank you very much. It's been really interesting and delightful to hear from two churchyards that we've been involved with, Minsley and Bromfield. That was absolutely lovely. And I suppose also just to say, you know, thank you for your ongoing support of Caring for God's Acre. Those of you who are members, we are a membership organisation, and we really appreciate that. And for others, perhaps you might consider joining God's Acre. We don't get any direct funding from the church, so we do really rely on our members. And we really are there to offer support and to try and help you. We've got a new thing that we're just starting, which is to do a sort of virtual visit. We do need to charge for this, I'm afraid. We charge £100, but you prepare photos, can take us on a walk around with a tablet, that sort of thing, show us the churchyards, and we can give advice there and then, rather than needing to come out and, you know, spend more time. And perhaps that was something that we put together during COVID, but I think it's been very popular and will continue to be so. So we're very happy to give quite a lot of free advice, and then we can also go a little bit further with helping you with management planning, but we do need to charge at some point.
Thank you, Harriet. That's great, and that's an interesting thing that you've developed over the COVID period with the virtual tour. I like that, and virtual advice. That's really helpful.
We've all got so good at computers now, haven't we? That we're or not.
So we're coming to the close of our evening. Thank you, everybody, for participating. I'm going to hand over to Mike Bourke now, who's going to just close up for us and lead us with a prayer as well. So over to you, Mike. You got your mic on?
Yes, I have now. Thank you so much for inviting me to share in this evening. I have learnt a lot, and it's been a most interesting time. The central events of our faith, which we celebrate next week between Maundy Thursday and Easter Day, begin and end in gardens. The Garden of Gethsemane is a garden of grief and tears. Jesus' agony reveals the true depths of the incarnation, God's identification with us in our frail flesh, in physical and mental suffering, in betrayal, failure, condemnation, and blame. Lamb of God, you take away the sin of the world. Have mercy on us all. And then there's the Easter garden, which is a burial ground, where Jesus' body is laid in the tomb to rest over the Sabbath. Our churchyards are places of the community where we record our long history, remember our loved ones, and pray, rest eternal grant to them, O Lord, and let light perpetual shine upon them. But the garden of rest is also a garden of life, recalling the Garden of Eden. No wonder the risen Christ was mistaken for a gardener. New Adam, firstborn of the dead, the beginning of a new humanity and a renewed creation. Our churchyards share something of both these gardens. We're so grateful to Andy, Harriet, Barbara, Vivian, Romaine, Stephen, and Chrissy for inspiring us to care for God's acre as a sacred place of tears, reflection, and hope, where memories of the past mingle with the promise of resurrection and a new creation. So let's pray by saying this prayer on the screen together. O Christ, firstborn of all creation, through whom all things were made, whose breath imparted life to all, whose covenant embraced Noah and all creatures, who willed to make your dwelling in matter, becoming flesh for our sake. Teach us how we may let creation fulfill its destiny to glorify you, to praise you and highly exalt you forever. Amen.
Thank you, Bishop Mike, and thank you all for joining us this evening, and a special thanks to Harriet again. Thank you, Harriet. It's been a wonderful opportunity to hear some really special encouragement.